Okay, so we've finished chapter 11. We'll go now into the second part of the book. But just to remind us that now we're moving on to another whole part of the letter, a whole section of the letter. We've just finished the more theological part, and now we're moving on to the more pastoral section, which is looking at how best to live our Christian life in the various places we find our life in. And this is quite inspirational, this section, and full of encouragement. The gospel gives us a new vision, a new standpoint in life, and we're now invited and challenged by Paul to let all this influence our minds, our attitudes, our behaviours. And of course, this can be so countercultural, can't it? Because we have this new mind, this new vision that comes to us from baptism, and that's going to influence how we live in this passing world. Father Michael Fallon beautifully begins this new section in Paul's letter by commenting on Paul's opening words. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters. The word itself, appeal, is parakaleo, sometimes translated as beseech, sometimes exhort, sometimes encourage, sometimes comfort. And each nuance is present in the word. The word parakaleo, writes Father Michael, is Paul's usual word for moral exhortation, and includes his consciousness of being an apostle of the risen Christ, inviting all his readers to live the life to which Christ is calling them. In the first section, the first two verses rather, of chapter 12, Paul announces some key principles before looking at particular situations we find ourselves in. As a fundamental stance, we are to, quote Paul, offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, dedicated and acceptable to God. Our bodies, our ordinary human existence, that's what it means. And just as dead animals are offered to God in sacrifice to give him glory, even more we who are living creatures are offered to God to give him, of course, greater glory. The prophets often spoke against meaningless sacrifices when the hearts of those who came to the temple were really not focused on God. We are called to worship God as rational human beings and from hearts that are unsullied, pure and noble. Let your behaviour change, modelled by your new mind, says St. Paul. The thinking, discerning dimension of the human person is the mind. We're to use our minds, enlightened by grace, to discern how we're to act in any particular situation. This is the only way, says Paul, to discover the will of God. Yes, it's our reflective mind. It's that gift that God's given us to think through circumstances in a spirit of Christian love that will enable us to make the right choices. And of course, when we make the right choices, we're discovering the will of God. So in those two opening verses of chapter 12, Paul gives us a rather brilliant piece of advice on how to approach all the complicated events of life. Now we can divide the rest of the chapter into two sections. First one is living in community life, and the second one is charity towards everybody those outside community. So, first one, living in community, community life, chapter 12, verses 3 to 13. In Paul's understanding, when we were called to the faith, we were each given a charism, a gift, to be used to build up the Christian community. We're to judge ourselves soberly, he says. We're not to exaggerate our own importance, he adds. The reason given is because we're all parts of one body, thanks to our union with Christ. And, says St. Paul, as parts of the body, we belong to each other. Now, Paul elsewhere, of course, speaks about the Christian community as a body in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and how that body functions when all parts act together. Here, he now speaks about our charisms or gifts, and he starts to name them. And he begins with prophecy. Prophecy which Paul valued incredibly. And a prophet is a faith-filled person, as the text suggests, who is able to discern the will of God at a given important moment in time. He's able to name and clarify a situation we find ourselves in. That's a prophet. Next comes ministry or service, diakonia, deacon. It's not exactly clear what Paul means by that, because we haven't yet reached a time when a deacon is a particular ordained minister at all. We've rather got a vague sense of ministry or service. Then comes teacher and preacher. And then come a final three charisms, which have to do with works of charity. But the giver of alms, the giver of money, the provider of services. You think it's there, the provider of services could be somebody who's well off, who's able to help those that are less fortunate. And finally comes those who do works of mercy. As Paul writes, there's a real sense of, come on now, get involved. Use the gift you've got and be part of this community. Build it up. Find out your gift, find your niche, and then contribute. Do what you can to help the community. And then this living in community section ends with a rather beautiful, don't let your love be a pretense. Father Byrne notes that a similar list of advice appears in the first letter of Paul to the Thessalonians, chapter 5, and in the first letter of Peter, chapter 3. So that in these verses here, we've probably got an early Christian tradition of encouraging people, of exhorting people to live the good life. And Bishop Tom Wright says, read through these virtues listed here again and again and again, and feel their simple, practical energy they evoke. They offer a no-nonsense vision of Christian living, of living in community. Now the second section of chapter 12 is charity towards all, verses 14 to 21. Paul says, firstly, bless those who persecute you, never curse, bless them. Isn't this exactly what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount with the final beatitude? Blessed are those who are persecuted in the cause of right. Those who are persecuted in the cause of right. There's obvious challenges with Jewish authorities experienced already. But Father Fitzmyer says that there's no need to see the Roman persecutions here yet. This is just life trying to for Paul trying to work